The hard truth is, the coming federal mandate cannot succeed without Canadian consumer acceptance and the right market preconditions. Canadians expect certainty that they can afford, use, and charge their EVs in a manner that suits their different lifestyles and geographical requirements.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Part Stock. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate each and every one of you. Now in my last video, I stated that the House of Representatives, that's the US House, voted to pass HR 4468, known as the Choice in Automotive Retail Sales, CARS Act of 2023, with total GOP support. This bill aims to block the Environmental Protection Agency's EPA proposed rule backed by President Biden requiring 68% of US cars to be fully electric by 2032. Critics, including Republicans and some Democrats, argue the mandate is unrealistic, threatens consumer freedom, and increases dependence on China for rare earth minerals. Now, despite passing the House, the bill faces challenges with the Senate as President Biden threatens a veto. Now, the title of that video, House Rejects Biden's EV Mandate, How Does It Affect Canada? You can watch the video if you haven't yet done so. But lo and behold, I did a little research and indeed found that a similar call to action was done here in Canada, not by our politicians, but rather by the leaders within the automotive sector here. Incidentally, this press conference went unnoticed, and they ushered the very same sentiments we have been sharing time and time again here on this podcast. So in Ottawa on Parliament Hill, the automotive sector leaders presented their strategy for achieving 100% zero-emission vehicles by 2035. The federal government mandated this target in June 2021 for all new light-duty cars and passenger trucks. Representatives include Brian Kingston, President and CEO, Vehicle Manufacturers Association, David Adams, President and CEO of Global Automakers of Canada, and Huw Williams, spokesperson of the Canadian Automobile Dealers Association. So those of you who think I'm just making stuff up as I go along, take a look at this video I'm about to show you, and we will dissect it as it goes along. But quickly, please hit that subscribe button if you're new to the channel. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the auto industry press conference on Parliament Hill. This morning, we have Mr. Tim Royce, President and CEO of the Canadian Automobile Dealers Association, Mr. Brian Kingston, President and CEO of the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association, and Mr. David Adams, President and CEO of the Global Automakers of Canada. The group will make remarks and then take questions afterwards.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Tim Royce. I'm the President of the Canadian Automobile Dealers Association of Canada. Our over 3,200 members sell and service vehicles, all kinds of vehicles, in nearly every community in Canada and collectively employ over 160,000 people. In many ways, the transition to electric vehicles is progressing well. In Canada, there are numerous and exceptional battery electric vehicles available for purchase. These vehicles can be ideal for many families, and we believe consumer demand will continue to grow consistently in future months and years. The hard truth is, the coming federal mandate cannot succeed without Canadian consumer acceptance and the right market preconditions. Canadians expect certainty that they can afford, use, and charge their EVs in a manner that suits their different lifestyles and geographical requirements. Further, with the current high interest rates and high inflation severely impacting consumer affordability, many consumers lack the means to purchase EVs, as evidenced by the rising inventory levels on our dealers' lots today. We suggest government to focus on creating the right set of circumstances to stimulate demand. It is important to note that dealers across Canada are investing hundreds of millions in charging infrastructure and technology to lead the transition to electric vehicles. The federal government needs to produce a realistic and flexible plan that takes into account the vastly different economic and geographic realities of Canada. Due to prolonged periods of cold temperatures that affect the range of battery electric vehicles, as well as the substantially longer average distances they need to travel. This is not a simple economic issue, but a survival issue. Rural Canadians will be hurt the most by a mandate approach. Any EV sales mandate needs to be tied into real-world progress on public charging infrastructure, grid readiness, and consumer incentives.
Next week, the federal government is expected to announce.
Now, before we go further, no lies told here, and you saw what happened in Chicago just last week when they had the cold snap. So he has outlined the infrastructure and economic challenges Canadians will face and have been facing: high interest rates, high inflation, basic livable wages, cost of housing, food, basic things the average Canadian worries about on a day-to-day basis. Let's continue.
Its final zero-emission vehicle sales mandate. The mandate will dictate what vehicles Canadians can and can't buy, with a target of 100% ZEV sales by 2035. Automakers are committed to electrification. Since 2020, Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis have announced investments in Canada of nearly $15 billion, the majority of which is dedicated to ZEV assembly and the battery supply chain. The number of ZEVs available to Canadians has increased exponentially, from 3 models in 2012 to 77 models this year in every vehicle segment. An additional 41 models are expected in Canada next year. EV inventories are at record levels now, with the average weekly inventory increasing 146% year over year as of November. This has enabled EV sales to increase, reaching 12.1% of new vehicle sales in the third quarter of 2023. Rather than micromanaging vehicle sales across Canada, mass adoption requires urgent efforts to address affordability and charging challenges that are facing Canadians. The forthcoming regulation will have a disproportionate and negative impact on low-income Canadians, rural Canadians, and northern Canadians. For those Canadians that are able to afford ZEVs, the next challenge they face is a lack of charging infrastructure. According to Enercan, 442,000 public chargers and 2.2 million multi-unit residential chargers are required by 2035. There are currently only 25,000 public chargers available to Canadians and no plan to close the gap. The Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development came to the same conclusion, quote, "There remains a large gap between the current number of charging stations and those needed by 2035. The Commissioner also found that if the number of charging ports does not keep pace with the ZEV sales targets, there is a risk that these targets will be unachievable. To reach the target the government has established, we would need to see 35,000 new chargers built every single year until 2035. The forthcoming ZEV mandate will leave Canadians out in the cold. Fortunately, there is a better way. We're calling on the government today to help Canadians make the switch to electric with the supports required, not mandate what they can and cannot buy."
My name is David Adams, President.
One thing I can vow about being in the auto industry, it's all about the numbers, the data, and the statistics. A good general manager will know and be on top of the numbers to ensure efficiency. So he has outlined everything in terms of how the infrastructure has set up, how many chargers will be needed, and what it will take for the government to enforce a lot of the situation in order to get people on this EV mandate. You can't go ahead and implement something and yet you're at least 20 years behind the 8 ball in terms of making the infrastructure as viable for those who can be accessible. Again, the price of the vehicle is another factor. So let's continue.
Of the Global Automakers of Canada. Our members will be responsible for providing the zero-emission vehicles in order to meet the aggressive ZEV targets under the imminent regulation. However, as you have heard, producing the products is only one piece of a very complex puzzle. For mass consumer adoption of zero-emission vehicles in all segments and for all regulated parties to succeed, we need a comprehensive ecosystem supported by government to address affordability, to maintain the ZEV purchase incentives, and to avoid counterproductive luxury taxes until price parity is reached. We require widespread charging infrastructure that's visible, available, reliable, and that operates at convenient speeds. We need further education and awareness to ensure that customers are compelled to make the switch. It is imperative that in 2024, a long-term forum be convened with governments, auto manufacturers, and consumer representatives, as well as energy providers, to table and mutually address consumer adoption barriers on the ambitious road ahead to 2035.
And we didn't even mention the grid. The grid is also another problem. I'm happy that he squeezed that in because we have been emphasizing about the price and the charging infrastructure. But what about the electrical network itself? How will the grid manage?
I would note that out of all of the countries that have committed to a 2035 ICE ban, those countries only represent about 19% of global vehicle sales. It will be important to have a transparent and ongoing review process as we move forward towards the legal regulatory targets, along with the willingness of the government to course correct if the targets prove unattainable due to external conditions.
Now, market forces will only streamline a demand for ICE vehicles once EV becomes mainstream. Prices for traditional combustion engines will start to go through the roof. A lot of traditional vehicles will start to become collector's items, fetching hundreds of thousands and eventually millions of dollars. In Canada here, we will have our own battery making plant and EV production facilities to compete with China, but it will be at the expense of the environment.
How dare you!
But all I can say is, forgive them, Father, they know not what they do. Ironically, this press conference was done sometime last year in June, according to the timeline. I will leave the link in the description box below. As usual, please share your thoughts in the comments. Remember to grab a copy of my ebook, The Parts Manager Guide. Please smash that like button on your way out. It will only take you 1.5 seconds to do so. Until next time.